Most people walk right past gold every single day without ever realizing it is there. Rob Parsons is not most people. Deep in the Australian wilderness, working alone on a river that 19th-century miners had already picked through and left behind. Just come across this rock wall here, which must have been from the old-timers. I've stacked it all up. Rob reaches into a crack in the bedrock and pulls out something that changes the entire complexion of the day. Then he reaches in again, and again. By the time Rob walks out of that wilderness, he is carrying more than 25 grams of raw gold worth over $2,000, recovered from ground that every other prospector had already written off and abandoned. No drilling, no machinery, no team, just one man, a suction nozzle, and a depth of knowledge about where gold conceals itself that transforms a so-called worked-out river into one of the most remarkable small-scale discoveries in recent Australian prospecting history. This is the story of how Rob Parsons found what everyone else missed. A man who takes gold seriously. Rob Parsons is not a weekend hobbyist chasing flakes in a well-known creek. Rob is a dedicated small-scale gold prospector who works across remote river systems throughout Australia, consistently documenting multi-gram finds from ground that other prospectors have either overlooked entirely or dismissed as unproductive. His recorded trips span Victorian goldfields country and remote waterways where road access runs out and the rest of the journey has to be made on foot. Gold prospecting at the level Rob operates demands a specific combination of geological literacy, physical capability, and methodical patience. If we go try to cut through some of that regrowth, go up and then drop down the other side, yeah, there'll potentially be some gold in that creek. Rob reads river terrain to pinpoint hydraulic traps. He studies historical mining records to understand which ground has been worked and which has been left untouched. He analyzes the results of each trip not simply as a haul, but as data, using the location, size, and distribution of the gold to tell him something meaningful about the system lying beneath the riverbed. That accumulated field knowledge is what separates Rob from prospectors who cover far more ground and find considerably less gold. Rob works less water, but works it at a depth most operators never bother to reach. On previous documented trips, Rob has recorded multi-gram days from remote Victorian river systems where other prospectors panned the very same ground and walked away with nothing. The consistency of those results across different locations and different geological settings points to something well beyond good fortune. A systematic approach that extracts value from places others write off. Rob does not chase distance. He does not move to a new section of river every hour, searching for the magic spot that pays out without much effort. Rob identifies the highest probability zones within a given stretch, commits to those zones entirely, and works them until the ground has nothing left to offer. So I've just finished up on this big inside bend here. Had that awesome crevice that ran along the side of it the whole way and crushed it. That discipline is slower than the way most prospectors operate. It is also the direct reason Rob walks out of remote Australian bush with gold in his bottle on trips that other operators record as blanks. His reputation for finding gold in locations others pass over is the straightforward product of a methodology refined across years of documented fieldwork. That methodology is exactly what he brings to this river, and it is exactly what makes what happens next possible. The river with a history. The location Rob returns to was not chosen on a whim. This river carries a history stretching all the way back to the Australian gold rushes of the 1850s. When tens of thousands of prospectors moved through the bush, stripping accessible gold from every waterway they could reach. They left marks on the landscape that are still perfectly readable today, trenches cut into hillsides, long ridges of displaced rock called tailings piled along riverbanks, hand-built channels designed to divert water, and shallow pits sunk into bedrock wherever the surface showed color. Rob identifies all of these markers at this location. The old miners were here. They worked this ground hard. But the miners of the 19th century operated within the limits of their era's tools and knowledge. They targeted gold they could see and reach with the equipment they had. They were not diving into bedrock crevices with suction nozzles. They were not chasing fine gold locked in microscopic fractures 2 feet below the gravel surface. They were skimming the accessible layer and moving downstream to the next productive section. That systematic skimming left a specific category of gold behind: deep crevice material, fine gold in bedrock fractures, pockets trapped in hydraulic low points that the old-timers walked straight over without ever knowing they were there. Rob arrives at this river not in spite of its mining history, but because of it. Historical activity is confirmation that a gold system exists. Rob is here to find out what that system still holds. Setting up in the wilderness. Rob establishes a remote camp within walking distance of the river and lays out his kit for the first morning: rock hammers, chisels, a portable crevicing tool, a suction nozzle for drawing sediment out of tight spaces, and a series of classifier screens and pans for processing whatever comes out. The sound of the river carries clearly from camp. The nearest other person is hours away on foot. There's my camp just up there. But for them to be able to work this section, they had to divert all the water onto this side of the stream, which they did through these passages. Now, in between here and that other island would have been like a natural dam, just filled with overburdened big rocks. The decision to camp rather than day trip is deliberate. Rivers that can be reached in a single day attract a steady rotation of recreational prospectors who work the same accessible pools and gravel bars over and over. Those high-traffic sections have been thoroughly picked over. The gold that was easy to reach has already been reached. What remains in the obvious spots is the leftover residue that consistent pressure from dozens of prospectors per season has already reduced to trace amounts. The rivers that demand a multi-day commitment, carrying gear in over difficult terrain, establishing a base camp, accepting that the drive home is not an option until the work is done, hold deposits that day trippers never get close to. Not because those prospectors lack the knowledge to find it, but because they lack the time and the commitment to reach the ground where it is sitting completely undisturbed. Rob accepts those conditions as simply the cost of access. He has done this enough times to understand clearly that the remoteness of a location and the quality of its undisturbed deposits are directly connected. Rob scouts the first working section on the afternoon of his arrival, walking the riverbank and reading the bedrock exposure before putting any tool in the water. A series of exposed shelves runs along the inside of a riverbend, broken up by ledges and crossed crevices oriented directly perpendicular to the current. Every one of those features is a potential trap. Rob notes 3 priority zones and plans his sequence for the following morning. Then he returns to camp, eats, and waits for the light. Where gold hides and why. Gold has a specific gravity of 19.3, nearly 19 times heavier than water and roughly 8 times heavier than the gravel and sediment that surrounds it in a river system. When water loses velocity, it drops its heaviest cargo first. And gold drops faster and deeper than almost anything else in the channel. This is the physics underpinning every significant placer gold deposit ever found. It is also the reason Rob targets the locations he does before he ever puts a single tool in the water. In a river, water slows down at predictable points. The inside of a bend always runs slower than the outside, making the inner bank a natural collection zone for dense material. Behind large boulders, in the sheltered lee of bedrock outcrops, at the base of drop-offs where fast water suddenly decelerates. At every one of these locations, gold settles out of the current and accumulates over time. A prospector who understands these mechanics can walk an unfamiliar stretch of river and identify the productive zones before picking up a single tool. Rob does this on every trip. Bedrock is the final destination. Gold sinking down through gravel and sediment cannot pass through bedrock. It comes to rest on top of it, or falls into cracks and crevices in the rock surface and stays there indefinitely. A crevice in bedrock oriented perpendicular to the current acts like a sluice box built by geology itself. Gold strikes the upstream wall of the crack, drops in, and the same density that carried it there pins it against the bottom. Lighter material washes over the opening and keeps on moving. The gold does not. The river comes down here, bends around that way slightly, slight inside bend. So gold is concentrating here, comes behind that rock, and falls into the spot where there's no pressure. Flood events push fresh accumulations of sediment and gold into those crevices with every major rain. Decades pass. Centuries pass. By the time Rob reaches those crevices with a suction nozzle and a chisel, what is locked inside can represent 100 years of accumulation compressed into a space smaller than a shoebox. This river has been funneling gold into its bedrock cracks since long before the first European prospector ever set foot in Australia. Rob is about to find out exactly how much has built up. The first real break. Rob is working a bedrock shelf on the inside of a river bend, cleaning out the third crevice of the morning, when the suction nozzle pulls something heavy. Rob stops the flow, tips the nozzle, and a piece of gold drops into his classifier. Not fine, not flake-sized. A solid, chunky piece, visibly coarse, sitting bright against the black plastic. Rob picks it up, roughly half a gram from a single hole. Rob goes back into the crevice. The sediment inside is deeper than it appeared from the surface. The crack runs further into the rock, packed tight with compacted gravel and clay. Rob works the nozzle in deeper, opens the walls with a chisel to create more room, and keeps pulling. More gold comes out, 3 additional pieces from the same crack, the largest sitting at close to a gram on its own. Rob spreads them across his palm. For pieces, 1 crevice. Less than 20 minutes of work. Rob does not declare victory and move on. He marks the location, notes the orientation of the crack relative to the current, and looks downstream at the next section of shelf. The same bedrock formation continues for another 30 meters along the inside of the bend, the same geometry, the same hydraulic position, the same crevice pattern repeating. If one crack in this position is producing at this rate, the system controlling it is not confined to a single spot. Rob moves to the next crevice downstream and works it completely. Gold. He moves to the next. Gold again, smaller pieces this time, but the color is unmistakable. By the time Rob has worked through the entire first section of the shelf, the running total in his classifier is sitting above 4 grams. Day 1 is not finished. Rob kneels back over the bedrock and keeps going. Days of consistent results. Gold shows up on day 1. It shows up on day 2. By the third day, Rob has worked through multiple sections of the same river stretch, and gold has appeared in every single one of them. This is the point where the story shifts from an exciting find to a confirmed discovery. A single productive crevice can turn up almost anywhere in historically gold-bearing country. So I'm going to have a few hours in the water before I take off at around lunchtime. And there's a little crevice around here just below the camp on an inside bend that I started opening up late in the day yesterday. My mass camera battery was dead, so I wasn't really filming. I got 2 little bits of gold, and I feel like that could be worth opening up further. The material has been distributed by millions of years of geological movement, and isolated pockets turn up across wide areas. One good find is exciting. It does not confirm that the surrounding ground is worth committing to. What confirms that is what happens when the work continues past the first result, past the second, past the easy optimism of early production, and into the sustained effort that either validates the ground or exposes it as a one-spot wonder. Rob's results keep coming. Crevice after crevice along the exposed bedrock shelf produces gold. Not the same volume at every spot, but consistently enough that Rob can map the productive zones and focus his effort on the richest sections. The gold varies in form. Fine material packed into clay-filled crevices, coarser pieces from open fractures in the bedrock face, and the occasional chunky specimen from pockets where accumulation has been building for decades, completely undisturbed. The distribution of that gold across multiple locations along the same river stretch is itself geological information. It means the source of the gold, the reef or lode system feeding the alluvial deposit, is likely upstream, and has been contributing material to this river over an extended period. Rob is not working a single anomalous pocket. He is working a river system that is genuinely productive across its entire bedrock length. By the midpoint of the trip, Rob's running total has crossed 15 grams. 15 now, so I've had 2.5 hours here picking around, but I think I'm going to head back to camp. I'm going to see how much gold I got. I'll clean it up here and put it back in the snuffer. At a point where a single gram per day represents a strong result for manual crevice work, Rob is averaging more than 4 grams per productive day across different sections of the same system. The final confirmed haul for the expedition exceeds 25 grams. At gold's market price of approximately $90 Australian dollars per gram at the time of the expedition, that places Rob's total at over $2,250, recovered entirely through hand tools from a river the old-timers had already worked through. That is the number behind the word massive. That is what the headline means. The mark of the old-timers. Midway through the expedition, Rob encounters something in the bedrock that stops him again. Not gold this time, but evidence. A channel cut directly into the rock face, roughly 3 feet wide and running for several meters along the riverbank. The walls are straight. The base is flat. Nature does not cut bedrock like that. Hands did. Someone stood in this exact spot, probably 150 years ago, and spent days carving this channel with steel hand tools in order to divert the river and expose the bedrock beneath. Rob follows the channel to its endpoint. It terminates at a section of riverbed that would have been dry, workable ground once the water was redirected. A cleared floor where old-timer miners could stand and access crevices that were otherwise submerged and completely out of reach. Rob crouches at the end of the channel and examines the exposed bedrock in front of him. Some crevices here show clear signs of previous work. Edges worn smooth, interiors already cleaned out. Others are still intact. Tight crevices, narrow fractures running deep into the rock face. Spaces that a man working with 19th-century hand tools could see but could not reach. Rob selects a crevice that runs nearly vertical into the rock, the kind of crack that would have been impossible to clean with a manual tool in the 1800s but opens readily to a modern suction nozzle. The sediment inside is old and compacted, completely undisturbed. Gold comes out on the first pull, then more gold on the second. The old-timers built every meter of that channel by hand, redirected an entire river section, and then walked straight past this crevice because their tools simply could not get into it. Rob's tools can. And the gold that has been sitting in that crack since before Federation is now sitting in his classifier. The risk that runs alongside the gold. Working alone in remote Australian bush carries risks that do not disappear simply because the rewards are real. On one section of riverbank, Rob spots an eastern brown snake moving through the grass between the water's edge and his gear. Eastern browns are among the most venomous land snakes on Earth, ranked second globally for venom toxicity. They are common in the bush country that overlaps with Australia's gold-bearing regions. They are active near water. They move quickly when startled, and they do not need to be provoked to become dangerous. Rob goes still, gives the animal plenty of space, and waits until it has cleared the area before continuing to work. That encounter is not unusual, and it is not the only risk Rob manages on this trip. Cold water immersion across multiple consecutive days of demanding physical work creates real, cumulative fatigue that affects both strength and decision-making. So hard to talk when your lips have been in cold water for the last 7 hours. Rob is digging, lifting, diving into crevices, and working against the current for full days in water running several degrees below comfortable. The physical toll of that accumulates across a multi-day expedition in ways that a single day out never reveals. The remote location compounds every risk. There is no calling for help and having it arrive promptly. Rob carries appropriate first aid equipment and operates with the situational awareness that years of remote fieldwork develop. But awareness reduces risk, it does not eliminate it. The eastern brown on the riverbank that morning is a physical reminder of what is always present in this environment, whether visible or not. Every gram Rob pulls from this river carries a cost that goes well beyond the physical labor of extracting it. That cost is the acceptance of conditions, isolation, cold, wildlife, the irreducible exposure of being far from any backup, that most people would not willingly sustain for days at a stretch. Rob sustains them because he knows what the ground holds. On this trip, the ground is proving him right with every crevice he opens. What Rob pulled out and why it matters. Rob's final confirmed total for the expedition is more than 25 grams of gold, recovered entirely through hand methods across multiple days of work on a single river stretch. The applicable market rate at the time was approximately $90 Australian dollars per gram, placing the haul at over $2,250 in recovered metal. More than $2,000 pulled from a river widely regarded as a worked-out historical site. That figure is the concrete proof behind every claim this story makes. To put that number in context against what small-scale prospecting typically produces, most recreational prospectors operating in the same type of ground measure their results in fractions of a gram per outing. A full gram in a single session is considered a strong result. Multi-gram days are rare enough to be genuinely noteworthy. Rob maintained multi-gram production across consecutive days in different sections of the same river. That is not a streak of good luck. That is a productive gold system delivering consistent results to a prospector who understood how to read it and work it. Rob Parsons did not stumble onto this result. Rob chose a location with verified historical gold production and selected a remote section that modern recreational prospectors have not picked over. Rob read the terrain to identify the highest probability bedrock zones before starting work. Rob applied an accurate understanding of gold behavior to target crevices and hydraulic traps rather than surface gravel. Rob committed to the physical work of cleaning those crevices completely rather than skimming the top layer and moving on. Every gram of that haul is traceable to a decision Rob made before he ever put his boots in the water. The location, the method, the multi-day commitment, the geological knowledge. Each element contributed its share to what ended up in his gold bottle. None of it was luck. All of it was repeatable. Rob found the spots the old-timers missed, reached the crevices the water had been filling for 100 years, and walked out with the proof that remote ground, genuine knowledge, and disciplined effort are still the most reliable combination in the world of small-scale gold prospecting. The river gave up its gold because he gave it no choice.